All right, let's begin. So the session was meant to be a session on Zambia and Uganda, but unfortunately, due to visa issues, who says visa issues are not pertinent to the discussion, the Ugandan speaker was not able to make it. Thankfully, the only one who couldn't come because of visa issues. So today, we have with us from the great country of Zambia, by way of UK, Miss Misozi Luatula, who's a lecturer in the School of Law of the University of Zambia. She's going to speak to us on Canadian-Zambian human rights engagements. Okay, and as discussants, we have the two OKs. The first OK, who's a conference coordinator, will be the general discussant. The second OK will be both a general discussant and social media discussant. In other words, relaying the tweets and so on and posts on, we're live on Twitter and Facebook from those two media. Without further ado, I will give Ms. Misozi Luatula as much time as she wants. Go on.
Thank you so much, Prof. Thank you, Prof, and thank you so much for this opportunity. As stated earlier on, I'm going to talk. As stated earlier on, my paper is on Canadian. Yeah. Why me? Why me? Okay. If you can't hear me, please let me know. Now you can hear me? Okay. As stated earlier on, my paper is on Canadian-Zambian human rights engagements, a critical assessment of the literature and research agenda. So basically, my paper is divided into about 5 sections. It will talk about history, the cooperating partners, Canadian human rights engagement in Zambia, analysis of the literature, and then I'll come to a conclusion. And I must admit that my research was a desktop research, but I was unable to find a lot of literature on Canadian engagements in Zambia. And also in the same manner, there's very little engagement between Zambia and Canada. And by this, I mean Zambian engagements with regards to human rights or contributions in Canada. So I think we should start with a brief history of Zambia. So Zambia became independent about 5 decades ago. And at the time of its independence, it was one of the richest countries in Africa. It had rich mineral resources. But in the 1970s, something happened. There were shocks to its economy, and these were both external and internal. External in the sense that the copper prices went down, and then also the oil prices went up. Internal in that there was a decline in government revenue. This obviously had an effect on the economy, which relied so much on natural resources. So Zambia basically relies on copper. So because of these, politicians tried to keep the economy afloat. Okay, so this meant that they would allocate resources meant for human rights to other sectors. The human rights sector obviously suffered hugely. And because of the effect on the economy, Zambia started engaging or relying more on donors for support. Zambia has recovered a little bit with regards to the economy, but we are still a developing country, as you all know. So Zambia has since started signing agreements with donors, and one of them, the most recent one, was a memorandum of understanding with donors for the provision of poverty reduction budget support, PRBS. And the donors involved were the World Bank, the European Commission, Denmark, Finland, and later on, Canada joined. But we'll talk about Canada later on, because although it's one of the donors, it's not a lead member. And the purpose of this PRBS is to contribute more effectively to the reduction of poverty, and then also the realization of the country's development goals. Canada is a member, as explained earlier on, but it is not a lead member. Now, with regards to Zambia and Canada diplomatic relations, Zambia diplomatic relations with Canada were established in 1966. And Canada's interest in human rights started in the 1970s, and that was before most donors. So it was one of the first countries to assist developing countries with regards to the adherence of human rights. And as with most donors, most countries, aid slowed down in the 1980s. But then in the year 2000, Canada came on board, I think in Africa generally. So I started emphasizing its aid in Africa. And in 2006, there were certain countries that Canada started engaged with regards to aid. Zambia was not one of them, but then in the 2006 framework, Zambia was included among the countries in Africa. So Canada's program is anchored to the Millennium Development Goals, now the Sustainable Development Goals. And then it emphasizes this new framework into 5 major sectors. That's good governance, supporting health outcomes, strengthening basic education, supporting the private sector development, and also advancing environmental sustainability. So with regards to Zambia, what is Canada doing? So we're now going to look at Canadian human rights engagements in Zambia. The first area, well, this is also my interest, it's with regards to gender-based violence. So Canada supports programs with regards to gender-based violence in Zambia. Firstly, gender-based violence, GBV, is very rampant in Zambia. In the first quarter of this year, there were about 5,000 cases of GBV that were reported to the police. And Canada, I think, has been involved globally to eliminate GBV. So it has played an important role in bringing global attention and action to ending child marriages, early and forced marriages. And for those of you who do not know, Zambia has the highest rates of child marriages in Africa. It is estimated at 42%. Yes. There is a disclaimer to that. According to the reports that I've seen, it's estimated at 42%, but they also include, they've included people who are 20 years. They say between 16 to 20 years. So I think that's not reflective exactly of the situation in the country. So basically on child marriages, the CRSC convention, we won't talk about that. With regards to a little bit of background on Zambia. So in Zambia, we've got customary law and statute law. We've got a dual system of laws. And since there's a dual system of laws, marriages under customary law are not regulated in Zambia. So there's no fixed age of marriage. Basically, a marriage will be valid if the lobola and all the rights of the marriage have been performed. And for customary law, it's not necessary to register. So it's not a requirement for customary law marriages to be registered. Also, with our statute law, there's no one definition of a child because different statutes will define children differently. Under the Marriage Act, the legal age for marriage is 21, but a girl who's below 21 can still get married if that person has the consent of the father, which is discriminatory, the father, the parents, the guardian, or the courts. But under the Penal Code, a girl under 16 cannot consent to marriage. Sorry, cannot consent to sex. But the Penal Code also states that a girl under 16 can legally be married under customary law so long as the rights of a valid marriage have been met. That's a customary law marriage. So what are the effects on human rights? Obviously, it steals away the childhood of most girls, infringes upon the right to education, and it also infringes on the rights to health, fistula, complications when giving birth, and so forth. So the Zambian government has realized how destructive these child marriages are on the children, their families, and the development of the country as a whole. It has now engaged in the nationwide campaign to end child marriages. So it has involved the Ministry of Chiefs and Traditional Affairs, which is obviously important for the customary law component of marriage. Okay, and the campaign was initiated in April 2013. So the Canadian government, through CEDA, came on board to support government efforts. It has supported the national strategy to end child marriages, and it's also supporting the national plan of action to implement the strategy. Apart from giving support to the Zambian government, the Canadian government has also given support to civil society networks. Okay, so the Canadian government has supported civil society networks on ending child marriages through the development of the network strategic plan launched in 2016. So this network is made up of 30 NGOs, both locally and international, and they've come together to complement government efforts in ending child marriages. The Canadian government has also been involved in conveying cooperating partners. So they've brought cooperating partners together so that they put resources together and so that they could have a shared purpose or shared vision towards the ending child marriages. So with this support from Canada, the government of the Republic of Zambia has launched the National Strategy to End Child Marriages 2016 to 2017. So it's there's a theme, accelerating our collective efforts to end child marriages in Zambia. And there's also a national strategy that by 2030, we should not have child marriages in Zambia. So that's with regards to gender-based violence and child marriages. Oh, and recently there was a conference hosted by Zambia. I think there were partners from all over Africa, and the conference was in Zambia on ending child marriages in Africa. That was early this year. The other engagement is in the fight against HIV AIDS. So in Zambia, the first case was diagnosed in 1984, and the epidemic in Zambia is obviously generalized. So it's not specific to certain population or certain groups of people, it's generalized. So it has affected almost everybody. But in the last 2 decades, there have been positive trends in halting and revising the effects of the epidemic. Okay. And obviously, cooperating partners did come in. So Canada was one of those cooperating partners through CEDA. And Canada had focused its support on, 1, strengthening the healthcare system, helping vulnerable groups gain control over their health and lives, and also promoting AIDS prevention measures and building links to other related health services. So Canada worked hand in hand with other cooperating partners in the health sectors together with the government of Zambia. So at the moment, there's this Troika agreement, they call it the Troika agreement, in which 3 donors act as lead on rotating basis. And as I explained earlier on, although Canada is one of those members involved, it has never been in the lead in Zambia. The other project related to HIV AIDS is the Maternal Child Health Project. And it focuses on strengthening maternal and child health maternal and child health system related to HIV AIDS. So it aims at improving food security for HIV positive mothers. It also aims at fostering community mobilization and education. Okay. So it's also involved in educating mothers about safe breastfeeding practices in order to prevent mother-to-child transmission of the disease. So what are the activities that this program entails? 1, promoting safe breastfeeding. It has also developed a program whereby families affected by HIV and AIDS are given food. And it has also involved the community. So it has trained community workers to help families affected by HIV and AIDS. And this project is concentrated in Lusaka, which is the capital city of Zambia. So it has reached about 1,500 positive women. Another project that Canada is involved in Zambia is the improvement of the cold chain capacity. So this has to do obviously with the maternal, newborn, and child health commitment. So it has to do with immunization, and it targets the whole country and provides support in terms of immunization. Obviously, the aim is to strengthen the routine immunization and therefore combat major killer disease of children in Zambia. So it aims to increase the cold chain capacity in Zambia, and because of this, the cold chain capacity has actually increased in Zambia, and it's also able to reach rural areas where there are no fridges and where there is need for children to be immunized. The other project has been on sexual and reproductive rights, and this also has, there is a chain, there's a link here: HIV, maternal and child health support, and sexual and reproductive rights. So it's actively involved in the awareness with regards to HIV AIDS in Zambia, and it has targeted 4 provinces at the moment. So the aim is the promotion of lifestyle and responsible sexual and reproductive health. And this project includes the church and the community. So instead of leaving the community behind, so I think the project includes the community and church members. It has also identified community health workers. We've got a shortage of trained health workers in Zambia, so this project takes on community health workers to help with the project. It has also built local capacity for testing and counseling with regards to HIV/AIDS. And then church leaders are also involved. And now there's a radio program targeting the youths on sexual reproductive rights. So these are some of the programs that Canada has been engaged in Zambia with regards to health. But there have also been setbacks. So in Zambia, 4 years ago, there was a scandal involving the Ministry of Health where huge substantial sums of money was stolen by government workers, and Canada lost almost 100 million. No, sorry, almost $1 million. Because so obviously it had to withdraw some of its aid, and most donors actually did withdraw some of the aid. The other program has been with regards to refugees. So we've got quite a number of refugees in Zambia from different countries. And so in 2014, the government of the Republic of Zambia and UNHCR launched a program for local integration of refugees. So the program was to assist refugees with regards to social, economic, legal, and peaceful coexistence. And Canada had contributed about $3 million to support Zambia for this project involving refugees. And then it's also important to mention that there are some Canadian mining companies that are in Zambia. So they are involved in mining in Zambia, copper mines. And these companies have been accused of human rights infringements in Zambia. So Canada, I think there's a national contact point responsible for promoting multinational cooperation, adherence to human rights. So, and Canada has maintained the NCP, I'll just shorten it, since 2000. And with regards to these human rights abuses, Canada has turned a blind eye. So although Canada says that it's responsible for, it's working hand in hand with this mining to ensure that there are no mining companies to ensure that there are no infringements of human rights. There are a number of infringements that have been recorded. Okay, and these people who work in those areas have experienced infringements. So some of the infringements that have been experienced is that these companies have been evicting locals from their area, so from the mining community. So they say this is mine-owned land and you cannot do your farming here, and therefore you can no longer live here. And there's also another practice whereby people who were originally in those areas have been asked to be paying tax, sort of not tax, but sort of license, so annual land licenses to those companies in order for them to farm in those areas. So Canada at one point helped, had to be involved, but after a while, those companies continued with this, the mining companies, continued with the same practices. And it seems that Canada is now no longer interested in finding out what's happening. And so those are some of the engagements that Canada has been involved in Zambia. But then, as stated earlier on, we've noticed that Canada is involved in human rights programs in Zambia, but there's very little that is known about its contribution. So maybe that's one of the critiques. There's very little known about its contributions in Zambia. So its contributions have been really invisible in most parts of the country. And there's very little written about what it is doing in Zambia. There are countries such as the UK aid and the US aid programs. For them, they've got evaluative reports, I think almost every year, of what they are doing in Zambia and how much money they've spent in Zambia. With Canada, there are no such reports. They do not have an impact assessment of their programs in Zambia. And even if they give money or they are supporting a program, they do not make follow-ups on those programs. So I don't know whether this is the right forum, but just recommendations. I was just like, maybe they should have their work done at field office in Zambia, and they ensure that their programs achieve their goals, and they also engage in strategic research of, what should be done and what's needed in that particular setting, and also encourage feedback. So thank you so much. This is the end of the presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Ozi, for not taking an hour, even though I'd given you free range. So we'll now go to the first official OK, Mr. OK Carlo, the almighty conference coordinator, to give us 5 minutes or so of your impressions.
Thank you so much, Prof. Ms. Ozi, I want to formally thank you for enriching this conference with a well-researched paper. As a matter of fact, somewhere when I was reading the paper, I thought you were Osgood trained because of how well researched the paper was.
I'm UCT trained.
Thank you so much. But belay is allowed, right? So, thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you. So, on your paper, as part of the work you did, you went down history lane, trying to see or narrate the engagements. Going by timeline, you mentioned that diplomatic relationship between Canada and Zambia was established in 1966, and formally, Zambia was included in Canada's aid program, that is the Millennium Development Goal, now known as Sustainable Development Goals, in 2005, with 5 cardinal objectives, which included promoting good governance, supporting health outcomes, strengthening basic education, supporting private sector development, and advancing environmental sustainability. Somewhere along your, in the course of going through your paper, I was struggling with a certain term which you used over and again. I didn't know whether it was a question of semantics or maybe due to my own limited knowledge. You were using the word contributions, Canada contributions. So to me, I couldn't make the connection between contribution and what we're discussing here, which is about engagement, except if it was used interchangeably. Your paper focused on, split it into 4 key categories, which in terms of using your word, contributions, Canadian contribution to human rights in Zambia, it's centered on health. Under health, you looked at HIV and AIDS, how they try to prevent from mother to child AIDS infection or something. Then you looked at also women's rights, which borders also on maternal child health, gender-based violence, child marriages, which you mentioned some figures here on the level of success they've achieved. The other area was on the issue of refugee rights. You mentioned 5 key countries that their refugees came into Zambia, and the Canadian authorities, through their contribution, quoting you, helped in trying to integrate these refugees and to make life easier for them. The other area was the issue of mining, which you mentioned that they try to implement something close to a standard set by Organization for Economic and Cooperation and Development, OECD, because like you mentioned, these foreign mining companies from Canada, they were like evicting the locals in order to take over their land for mining and also imposing taxes on them or royalties in order to use their own lands to farm. And that clearly reminds me or speaks clearly to an area, Baxi, Upendra Baxi, and also my Professor Kafo has written extensively on, which is a trade-related, market-friendly human rights, whereby locals are displaced. You know what I mean? Nobody cares about what happens to them, but just so that they can get what they want. You also mentioned about how the economic woes contributed to the, or had a knock-on effect on the human rights whatever of Zambia. So I was wondering if economic woes, which was made up of a natural crisis and economic hardship and all that, had a knock-on effect on on the human rights. What was actually the human rights record of Zambia before the economic downturn? Or would it be a case of in my place when somebody said something because the person was drunk? Could it be a case of what was in the person's mind that came out when a little wine went into the head? So would that be the case that it was economic hardship that brought out what was already in the DNA of Zambia? So pretty much this would be my observations for now. I think I personally look forward to this paper fully developed. I want to read of it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, okay, Carlo. Thank you. That was good. That was great. We'll now see if there's some social media commentary, tweets, wits, whatever.
There are no specific tweets to Zambia, and I'm not surprised because it's like 10:21 p.m. back home. So maybe some of them are.
They sleep early there?
Or maybe not. Or maybe while
Okay. Okay. All right. Okay, now time for a general debate. Anyone will proceed as we've always done. We'll collect some questions. Yes, please, can you pass a mic, somebody? Pass a mic. Yobe, if you are not on social media, you would have seen the mic next to you.
Okay, just a quick point on when you mentioned the Canadian National Contact Point, who I believe was appointed under the OECD guidelines for multinational enterprises. I hope you're also aware that there is a Corporate Social Responsibility Council, Global Affairs. So I am bringing the point out for the general project itself, especially for countries where Canadian mining and other extractive multinational are doing business, that one of the areas we could explore is the engagement that local populations have with these Canadian mechanisms that is intended to regulate Canadian businesses. So when we're doing the empirical work to look in the direction of whether the local populations, even the NGOs, are engaging with these mechanisms and to what effect, if at all.
Makes sense. Another question? Oh, you have a question? Okay.
You have a mic in front of you.
Okay, so I was just wondering from the presentations we've seen through yesterday and today, I can see a sense that with Canada really focusing on women's health rights, is there a plan for the country to be like, the bastion of, women's rights, especially in respect to health? Because I see that even in Zambia, they focus a lot on, prevention of mother-to-child transmission, and there's a causation between what scientists are discovering here in Canada with like technology for PMTCT and how the government is intervening in. Is there a link between that? Because the Canadian research institutions are doing very well when it comes to the science of these things, and we see the government supporting these programs in African communities. I'm trying to find out if there's a link to that. And I see some, you said there's literature, but you actually covered quite a lot, especially with knowledge mobilization, where the University of Zambia is engaging with the community on some of these things, which I think is one of the things New York University is trying to also pursue, that when we do this human rights work or we're doing this academic research work, it must sort of tie down with the community. So the engagement between civil society and the academia, I think it's quite visible. And that brings me to think about if there's a way Canada can be a mediator by saying, okay, we see this happening in Zambia with our engagement with Zambia, but it's not happening with Nigeria. Is there a way Nigeria and Zambia or Zambia and another country can engage to maybe better themselves in a particular area? I really don't see that. From the presentation, there's a lot of emphasis on the Dutch and the British doing a bit more than the Canadians. But I also noticed that from the reports in this paper, DFID, for example, is very good at saying, we did this, we did that, and they write for the public audience. But Canadians write for their own audience. You have to go to their website and see what they've done for which community and how much they've contributed. So why is it that way? Why are Canadians not addressing the public regarding what they've done? They're actually just keeping information for themselves. You have to actually ask or research. But DFID would do like press releases. They would engage with you to show that these are what they're doing for the community. Then on the OECD guidelines and national contact points, I'm interested. It's very interesting that the embassy there is having like, I don't know if it's a party or a dinner with the people to discuss the possibilities. I think it's because Canada does not have that voice to say, oh, these are what the miners are going through and we don't support it when the issues are also here. But I think by doing a party and saying, oh, in Canada, we have a national contact point, we have a CSR unit, maybe it's something you can adopt. I think I like that kind of engagement. It's sort of like a friendly, we're not saying this is what to do, but if you can adopt it, that would be nice. So I thought that was very good to raise here.
Excellent. Any other question, comment? Professor Cheje, please.
Regarding the prospect of Canada engaging with the companies that are in the mining industry in Zambia and intervening to prevent abuses of human rights, I don't think there is a great hope for that right now in Canada, because since 2009, 3 mechanisms and frameworks have been fashioned in Canada. One was in 2009, there was one called Doing Business the Canadian Way, all right, which was meant to guide the Canadian corporations that work abroad, including the mining companies. None of these documents talked about human rights. There was only one, which was in relation to the companies that were operating in Colombia or Guatemala, one of those. And it talked about human rights impact assessment, right? They've done this 3 times now, but there was no mention of the threat to the livelihoods of the indigenous people of Colombia, 1/3 of whom have been wiped out, and they stand the danger of being wiped out completely. There was the so-called human rights impact assessment never talked about these people, right? So now you begin to see whether they're actually walking the talk or they just put some documents together for the benefit of the public. So you would know Canada is doing something. But in reality, nothing really happens.
Thank you. Do you want to react to that, Ms. Susie? The 3 questions to begin with?
Yes, maybe. I'll start with the mining companies, the Canadian mining companies. So when I read that article, I think it was prepared by an NGO based here in Canada on the human rights infringements in Zambia. And then within, I think after about a week, there was a response by those companies. They were like, no, we are building schools, we're building hospitals, and we're doing all those things. But I don't, honestly, I do not think that that is enough. I think more needs to be done. So, obviously for them, I think it's more, as you have explained, it's more on making a profit than anything else. So they're building those hospitals, those schools, because they're making a huge profit, but they're also infringing other rights. There's also pollution and other things. So I think for them, it's mostly business. And once they're done with their business, then they will leave. And on the women's rights issue, well, I think I must obviously say something. I'm involved in human rights, so even my women's rights, sorry. So even my PhD is on women's rights. So basically, I think that Canada's engagement with regards to women's rights, is a welcome move, especially with regards to HIV and AIDS, because as we all know, the disease has had a huge impact on women as a whole. And then corporate social responsibility. What was the other question? Okay, he asked about contributions and engagements. I was using these two words interchangeably. I think I was talking more to engagements rather than contributions. Yeah.
Okay. It's not done. Any other question, please?
I wanted to just...
Yeah. Oh, okay, go ahead. Yeah.
I think on the area of CSR, sometimes it might be nice if we have like the Canadian engagers in the room to give us their own view as well. Because on the issues of like the mining sector in Zambia, for example, we all know that the area around business and human rights is still developing. So the UN guiding principles on business and human rights and the responsibility to respect is still growing. And I know Canada really at the UN level pushed and is still pushing to have, more countries get on board with the, UN guiding principles. So it might be nice to sort of hear from the Canadian side why they are following this approach and maybe why, like you said, those policy documents are still documents and they've not really become anything really strong. But I noticed in the paper, the use of contributions also is justified because even from the pilot project, we saw that most Anglophone African countries are just receiving. So from the academic work is obviously, it's contributions. Canada is contributing. I don't see Canada as, again, we have to define what engagement is. Is it sitting on the same table as equals? Is it any form of engagement? But the word contribution sort of justified in the paper when it's just Canada giving and giving and giving. Even where they said the people have stolen millions, they still gave in millions as well. So I just wanted to say that it would be nice sometimes if we have the Canadian angle to it to address some of these issues.
Are we sure Canada has been giving and giving?
Well, from what we see here, in fact, something very unique is on the paper that says there are several non-governmental Canadian organizations that have disbursed millions of dollars in aid to developing nations. So not even the government on its own, even NGOs here are giving to NGOs back home.
Well, how much did they take from the mines?
Well, that's why I said we don't know. Even while we investigate some of these things, I just said the area of holding them responsible in this area is still developing, so we can't really say.
Okay. All right. Okay. So third one. Yeah. Yes.
Provide some additional information on the comment I made about the CSR contact point and the counselor and the OECD contact point. The thing is that even Canadians themselves are frustrated that these mechanisms are not working. In the new year, there's going to be a hearing regarding amendment of the Canadian Business Corporations Act or something like that. There is suggestions about including some of these mechanisms in the regulation for the incorporation of companies themselves, to specify some of these practices in the law regulating corporations in Canada. And there are groups that are also recommending the appointment of an ombudsperson for corporate social responsibility issues in Canada, because it's a very, very big issue now. A number of Canadian companies are being sued in Canada, even though their businesses are in Guatemala, in Colombia, and some of these are, and in some of the cases they are losing those cases. In fact, I was watching a
Who is
clip.
losing?
The Canadian corporations, yeah. So now I was watching a clip of one guy who was one of the victims of these mining corporations in either Colombia or Guatemala, and he was saying, the question was, why are you bringing this case in Canada when the business is happening in your country? He says, because we know that in Canada they have all the answers. That is the only place they believe they can get the answer. So why this is important is if we do this research and we can show that these mechanisms that Africans don't even know that the mechanisms exist, let alone engaging with them, then it can generate the kind of advocacy tools that can be even used to reform the laws and the regulations and make them better and more accessible to people to use.
Okay. Any other questions, debate on this? We'll come to the table. Yes, Professor Kwewe, and then we can come back to Jake. Okay.
Yes, thank you, Professor Obiora. Just to join the ongoing debate, whatever, on this issue of contribution. Well, you know, the poverty reduction budget support, you know, which is kind of all over Africa, almost everywhere in Africa, particularly sub-Saharan Africa. It creates strong leverage for the donors. These donors practically want to control your public policy as a whole. They want to dictate many things for you because they support your budget. Without their support, I mean, your budget will not even won't be anything. Now, I don't know what other gain you wanted to get more than that. I mean, if they control your public policy, I mean, that's all. They just bought your country by supporting your budget and by threatening to withdraw their support. And knowing that they withdraw their support, there will be economic crisis in your country, and probably your government will fall. You know, so they dictate a lot of things. As for the NGOs that are involved in funding projects, you know, if you look carefully at some of these things, again, this is just merely a general statement, but if you look carefully at some of these things, they cancel each other out. What do I mean? If Canadian government is funding, say, population control programs, the Christian organizations in Canada will fund anti-population control programs. In other words, they may actually be actively involved in dissuading population from accepting the programs that are supported by the Canadian government. So we could look at these things carefully, find out they may cancel each other out, and instead of complementing each other as well. Because the entire goal is to control either your population or control your government policy. That's basically it. The charity there is the rubric. The real thing is control, as it were. And I haven't said that. There's a point that I think it was okay that made a point about the support for mother-to-child HIV transmission. You know, I think it's very important because my country, Nigeria, has some of the highest rate in the world of mother-to-child HIV transmission, because we don't support mothers in this regard. We don't, you know, and even the non-vertical transmission. Right now, the funding externally is reducing, and we are screaming that, oh, if it reduces, we are going to have more trouble in our hands. But we really ask ourselves, really, can't our government really fund this? I speak about Nigeria now. I'm not talking about that. Can't we really fund it? How much is this contribution? When the Carter Foundation comes to fund river blindness in our country, you have to ask, how much is this really that our government cannot support itself? You know, so if you look around, there are many things that we can do, but we'll not just take that seriously. We'll just say, well, somebody's going to do it for us, and so on and so forth. Now, I have a little question for the presenter, which is not really your paper, but your country. You know, Zambia, even though not geographically contiguous to South Africa, was called a frontline state. You know, and one of the images that remain eternal in my mind is that of your former president, Kaunda, actually weeping like a child at an anti-apartheid conference in Lagos when he was talking about apartheid. I mean, he just broke down and was just crying. And Zambia, I know as well, suffered a lot from South African reprisals during the apartheid years. How much have you gained from post-apartheid South Africa? In your estimation? Maybe migrant labor, bringing in money, whatever it is, you know, and how much have you gained from that?
Should I answer now?
If you want to.
I think let me answer now.
I think we have some questions. Maybe just wait for the questions.
We wait for the questions.
All right, thank you. Any other questions or comments?
I wanted to.
Okay, please come.
Just something.
Okay, BC.
After okay, I'll call on you.
Okay.
He was about to say something. I'll call on you, BC. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I'm sorry to do this again. I joined late today, but we are now ahead here. And the reason I'm not doing this is because I have to go and run around with the children.
Oh, you're leaving? Oh, okay.
It's almost 5 p.m. here. Don't mind if I excuse myself.
Oh, okay. That's all right. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'll join tomorrow again. But thank you very much.
Okay. Thanks, BC.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. All right. Okay. Go ahead.
No, my comment was just in response to Dr. Basil's point about, I think the argument between voluntarism and enforcement, because CSR is strictly a voluntary act. So you really cannot really put pressure on any company to do beyond what they actually created to do, make money. So the conversation around taking them to court and this case is winning, this just centers around the talk of capacity and willingness. If you look at Nigeria, for example, they had to use the Alien Tort Act in the US through the QBL case. The lawyers, everything, none came from Nigeria because there's no capacity. The people who are affected by these violations don't have the capacity. They can't do anything. They need a bigger engager to bring justice for them. And what does this say about the system? How can we really trust this as a way to follow? So if we say, okay, for this same Canadian-Zambian situation, oh, we can bring an action to court and they're winning. Is this going to be a great trajectory for us to follow? I don't know if you can share that, because I mean today, more than half of the 100 largest economies are businesses. So it's the debate between, is it a voluntary act or would they be held enforceable for that? And from the presentations from yesterday to today, I'm beginning to see the whole lackadaisical attitude of African governments, especially when they threaten Nigeria by saying, if you don't do this, we're going to cut aid. And they're saying, if you don't bring the money, we're not going to do anything. So with HIV treatment, for example, the Nigerian government is almost, they would never even put their hands into it because they know if the US doesn't fund, Canada will fund, somebody will fund this project, but it will not be us. So with countries engaging with one another, how is it affecting? I mean, I like to think of this like a child who is trying to walk, and every time they try to pick up something, you give it to them. Every time you give it to them. Is it really helping them build, Or are we going to be in trouble if we don't get this aid money from these countries? I'm beginning to think if the engagement, though we're benefiting from it, if it has some subliminal disadvantages impeding on our development as a country or as a continent.
Professor Kangara, please. Please, microphone, please, to him. Yeah, just pass to Solo. Okay.
Thank you again for a good afternoon and a good presentation. I'm very interested in the women's rights dimension of your work, because from the women's rights movement in Africa, one can gain certain insights about how Western governments engage with Africa, African governments how they engage with local communities and NGOs and so on. Over time, I think the women's movement has come to a point, I don't know if it is a point of trust with the donors or whatever it is, whatever word you're going to use, where they actually can set the agenda for the donors by presenting their proposals and saying, these are the issues we want to address in this 5-year plan or something like that. And the donors, I don't know because I've not been in the movement, but I suspect that the donors typically will say, okay, so that is what Zambia, the women's issues in Zambia are. They live and do studies, go to the villages, find out, is it land? Is it early marriage? Is it FGM? Whatever it is, and fund along those lines. So my point is, in order maybe to understand these contributions, we probably not only have to look at the donor government, but also look at how the local NGOs are continually refining the human rights agenda. And not just the NGOs or the movement people. And by the way, in the world now, movement is very important. That's why we have Brexit, we have Trump. Don't ignore those people. They do matter. The other group that might be, we are probably not focusing enough on, might be the academics, because they're the ones who get those consultancies. And sometimes those consultancies do define the human rights agenda or provide direction. Donors are no longer just listening to government and what the government is saying. They have all these other social movement players that might, maybe all of us, including myself in the Kenyan project, need to pay attention to. That is where the engagement is pretty much. So I appreciate your work from that perspective.
Thank you. Any other comments? Questions? Including from those sleeping at the back. There's jet lag issues. Okay.
Can I answer
Okay, please
Professor's
go.
question?
No, Asa, go ahead. Oh, Moses, can Moses just add one and you can? Yeah.
Just a follow up on the issue of corporations being accountable. Don't you think that perhaps the governments are not engaging enough at the negotiation table? If, for example, a company A decides to go and do business in Zambia, that yes, you are welcome, but these are the conditions within which you should operate with. Don't you think perhaps that's where we should try maybe to be more influential and set our own conditions rather than whoever is coming with their own conditions? Thank you.
All right. So Ms. Susie can tackle. You don't have to tackle all. Some are comments. So.
Yes, actually, most of them were just statements. Thank you so much. So I'll try and answer some of the questions that were posed. So starting with Prof about how we've benefited from South Africa. Yes, actually, Zambia helped a lot because I think Thabo Mbeki used to live in Zambia, and there were so many people who used to live in Zambia during the apartheid regime. I can't think of any situation where we've benefited. I'm sure they're there, hopefully, but I can't think of anywhere Zambia has benefited from South Africa. We are part of SADC, so we pay the same fees, the university fees, as South Africans, but that's it. That's the only contribution anyway that I've gained because I went to UCT. Yes, yes. And on contracts, I agree that as Africa, and particularly as Zambia, we need to do a lot when it comes to negotiating. Thanks. But I think, firstly, it has to do with a lot of problems. Most of the times, we send people who are not experienced in contracts or in the industry to such meetings. We send politicians or relatives of politicians. So when they get there, obviously they won't be able to negotiate. And sometimes I think it's also a thing of corruption, because you want a certain company to come to your country, so somebody has already gotten a chunk of money from that mining company to come to Zambia, and so they will just say, oh, you've got this contract, we will sign it and we'll go, you'll come to Zambia. But I think the other thing is that sometimes it's also the economic situation of our countries. So you're thinking, if this mining company comes to Zambia, maybe they'll be able to create jobs. They'll be able to, build schools, build hospitals. In actual fact, they're taking a lot from Zambia. Actually, there's been a report that about 5 years ago, Zambia sold its copper mines to, I can't remember the organization. And within a year, that mining company was able to recover so much, more than 100% of what the company was sold for. So I think, I don't know what can be done about that, but I think sometimes it's us, the people, just to be more involved and just maybe more aware of the situation, but I don't know what can be done.
Because it looks like you're a good African Christian. Because this explanation is so...
it's going round and round, hey?
No, it's so trusting. You assume that the problem is that, these officials, they don't know what they're doing. They just...
No, but I've also said some know, because some are going to get money from these companies. So they'll get money and just
That's
sign
the main
the
problem,
contracts.
actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the main problem.
And those companies also know, let's be honest, those companies also know that when we're going to Africa, even if they're coming from, countries where they respect human rights so much, they know that when you're going to Africa, we have to have money just to bribe them. And for them, it works. So they'll come to Africa, they'll bribe officials, and those officials will easily sign.
So the advertised sale price of the mine, right, is not... So when you say the company made that profit in a year, it may not be true. Because the advertised sale price is not the price for which it was sold, usually, right?
That's
anyway,
true.
I'm Nigerian, so, I'm just joking. Who is us? Are you Nigerian? Yeah? Chanji. Dole. Anyway, any other questions, comments? Speak now. Or be quiet. Okay. We have time for one more. Two? Nadesh and Professor Cheje will be the last. Yeah. So Professor Cheje, then Nadesh will have the final word. Yeah. No, him first. Yeah. Go ahead. Where are the microphones, please? Okay. Where are the microphones? Thank you.
Yeah. There was a question about if it would not be better, instead of Africans crying about development actors engaging in activities that actually makes poverty more entrenched in Africa, if the governments themselves of Africa should not begin to spell out their own investment conditions, all right? From a practical angle, I don't see, that is assuming that Africans have control over the development agenda. They don't. They really don't. You know, and there is a lot of competition right now for foreign investment among Africans themselves, African countries. In the competition, we are seeing a lot of investment laws being watered down. You know, everybody wants to get ahead. You want to attract investment from China. You want to attract investment from America or from Canada. What you need to do is to make your country investment friendly. Being investment friendly means you are going to virtually give everything out to people. They can repatriate everything that all the profits they make. They are not compelled to reinvest anything within the country. They can take any loans they want to take within the country. In fact, they are more eligible for loans within the country than the indigenous entrepreneurs. You know, in that kind of situation, you are not in control of your development agenda. And, you know, proposing that somehow Africans can begin to spell out in rigid terms what they want investors to do is virtually a non-starter under the current circumstances. And you talked also about corporate social responsibility. What I referred to in Canada was the 3 attempts to create a framework for corporate social responsibility in Canada, which failed. In fact, the second one, I forget the name of it now, was defeated in Parliament. Bill C-300 was defeated in Parliament, although narrowly. And then it was the last one now was the one put in place in 2014 called Doing Business the Canadian Way. And even that one has not shown any real prospect of controlling the activities of multinationals. And that is what he was referring to when he said, people are beginning to come and litigate in Canada rather than doing it back home, you know, and litigation is expensive. In Canada, it is beyond the reach of most people who are affected by human rights violations in these countries. And not until lately, Canadian courts will not even allow these kinds of litigation in Canada. You know, the fact that we have 3 of them right now or so pending in courts is actually a great move forward because Canadian courts traditionally will not even allow it. That is why we have not had such litigation, a history of such litigation, unlike in the US, where people come and litigate, you know, violations of human rights. Here is just something that is just beginning, very tentatively, you know, so.
Okay. All right, Nadesh.
Thank you. Actually, I think the previous responder just addressed some of the things I was going to talk about, the differences between the 2009 and 2014 CSR strategy. But still, one thing that I wanted to talk about was the sort of the need to avoid the strict binary between the CSR as a mandatory framework and what is legal, because I think within the CSR strategy you could see sort of an effort from the Canadian government to implement what can be seen as a mandated self-regulation, and this is a concept that is being discussed by scholars such as Professor Idemudia, actually. We're working on a paper precisely comparing the differences between the 2009 and 2014 CSR strategy. And you could look at the fact that the government is using some kind of soft power to try and get the mining corporations to be in line when they're abroad, because it's affecting Canada's reputation abroad. And in fact, they're threatening to you know, keep funding away from corporations that are not abiding. So that's not really strictly voluntaristic if you look at it that way. And in fact, Canada is also trying to get mining companies to align their actions with diplomats, cultural representatives from Canada that are literally government representatives abroad. And in that sense, that actually also addresses Olabisi's discussion from yesterday that was calling for a more coherent foreign policy from Canada when it comes to managing its mining corporation. It is not strong yet, but I think it shows the desire from the government to actually get that going. And I think it is a clear evidence of an engagement that is happening with Canada's mining sector when it comes to business and human rights interaction. Thank you.
Okay, with that, join me in thanking the speaker and the discussants.